وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. Allah says in the Quran, behold, Allah enjoins upon us all justice and doing of good and generosity, and to be good to our fellow human beings through generosity. And He forbids all of us from shameful deeds, evil, and all types of rebellion. My brothers and sisters, Allah orders us all to be just, and justice must prevail at all costs. For example, He says in the Quran, in another verse, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ لِلَّهِ شُهَدَاءَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا هو أقرب للتقوى إن الله خبير بما تعملون. All you who have attained to faith, be ever steadfast in your devotion to Allah, bearing witness to the truth in all equity, and never let hatred of any lead you unto sin and deviating from justice. Be just, for justice is closest to being Allah conscious. And remain conscious of Allah. Verily, Allah is aware of all that you do. Brothers and sisters, justice is imperative for a Muslim. Whatever we do, we must always be just. Wherever we are, we must behave justly. No matter what happens, justice is an essential feature of our faith. Remember what Allah says, اِعْدِلُوا وَأَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Be just, for that is the closest, أَقْرَبُ, closest to Allah consciousness. There is nothing else in our faith that has been defined or described in this way. Nothing else except being just. Justice at all costs. At all costs. We should be just and not let hatred of other people sway us from serving justly. In other words, if somebody I dislike, and because of my hatred I don't deal with them justly and fairly, I'll be questioned on the day of judgment. Allah orders us, my brothers and sisters, in another verse, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ وَلَوْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ إِن يَكُنْ غَنِيًّا أَوْ فَقِيرًا فَاللَّهُ أَوْلَى بِهِمَا فَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَى أَن تَعْدِلُوا وَإِن تَلْؤُوا أَوْ تُعْرِضُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. O you who have attained to faith, be ever steadfast in upholding equity, bearing witness to the truth for the sake of Allah, even if it goes against your own interests, against your own parents or your relatives. Whether the person is rich or poor, Allah's claim takes precedence over the claims of anybody else. Do not then follow your own desires, lest you swerve from justice. For if you distort the truth, behold, Allah indeed is aware of all that you do. Look at this verse in which Allah says, and always be just. Always be just. Even if it means you have to go against your own self. In other words, justice against self-interest. Justice even if I have to go against my parents. Justice even if I have to go against my relatives. Justice against the rich or the poor. Justice at all costs. It doesn't matter who the person is. I should never be pushed or swayed by self-interest or person's power or richness. We always should be just. My brothers and sisters, this unswerving, uncompromising stance of Islam and justice is most unique feature of our faith. Unfortunately, in the world where we live today, injustice is so prevalent, it's beyond belief. Injustice around the world is rampant. When you look back in the history and you look at the colonial past and its subsequent injustices, when you look at the history and you look at slavery of black people at the hands of Europeans and the centuries of injustice they experienced, when you look at the post-colonial construct of the world today, in which the rich are getting richer, the powerful countries are always getting powerful, the countries have been divided up in such a way that they will always remain less powerful, always remain weak, and the countries that are powerful will always remain powerful. Even the way the United Nations has been designed, The Permanent Security Council members are those who are the most powerful ones. They can veto, they can hold the whole world hostage, they can do anything they like. Injustice, even in our own time. Brothers and sisters, I want to talk about injustices in countries such as Palestine. Palestinian people have been suffering injustices at the hands of successive Israeli government since the inception, since the creation of Israel. What we're looking for is justice for all people. Justice at all. Justice for the Rohingya people. People of Rohingya from Burma have suffered at the hands of successive Burmese junta, and they have caused so much problem for the people of Burma. Or again, injustice. Rohingya people have suffered at the hands of Burmese junta again and again. Why, my brothers and sisters? Why have we turned a blind eye to such injustice perpetrated against Burmese people? Why? We've witnessed the injustice against Uyghur people in China, in the northwestern parts of China. Uyghur people in their millions have been put in concentration camp. They have been put in forced labor. They have had their man and woman tortured. They have been taken into prison arbitrarily. People have disappeared, have been locked up without charges. Systematic rape of women and girls. Brothers and sisters, this injustice is happening right in front of us right now, and yet the world is staying silent and not doing enough to stop it. Injustice in Syria. Syrian people have suffered at the hands of Bashar al-Assad for the last 8 or at least 8 years, if not 10. They've died in their millions. They've become homeless in their millions. One man's desire to stay in power and his clan's desire to stay in power, even though they represent less than 10% of the population, remaining 90% don't want such a butcher, such a dictator, such a brutal ruler over their heads, and yet they've got away with it because we've turned a blind eye and then allowed Syrian people to die. And do you know why we've allowed that to happen? Because our government in the West have decided that Syrian people should live under Bashar al-Assad is better, because otherwise they fear Syria will be taken over by, in quote unquote, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The Western world has sacrificed the lives of millions of Syrians for this so-called threat, not substantiated. Russia has bombed the life out of Syrians. It's sided the regime. Iran has sent its own military as well as paramilitary forces, creating a terrible bloodbath in Syria. We've witnessed this. It's called injustice, brothers and sisters. Yemeni people have suffered at the hands of the Saudi and the Iranian hegemony in the region. On one hand, Iran wants to take control of Yemen. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia wants to take control of Yemen. And in the middle, the innocent Yemeni people have been killed. Yemeni people are on the brink of not only an ordinary destruction and disaster, it is the biggest crisis that's facing humanity at this moment in time. Why have we allowed Yemen or Yemenis to suffer in this way? Injustice again. I can give you a list of injustice everywhere. Egyptian regime, military junta, years after years, decades after decades, have ruled the country with iron fists. Anytime Egyptian people wanted freedom, they have used the military power, have used the Western supplied intelligence. Britain, America, and European supplied intelligence and arm to destroy, to curtail freedom, to control their people, to imprison, to torture. It's at the hands of our governments that this has happened. We're still selling them weapons. We're still treating those dictators and despots from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from UAE, from many other countries when they come to UK with red carpet. We invite them to Buckingham Palace to have dinner with our Queen. We invite them to our Parliament. It's a disgrace and it's against justice. That's why we as Muslims constantly talk about justice and stand against injustice. It doesn't matter who perpetrates it. If it's perpetrated by my father, I should speak up against it. If it's perpetrated by my country and my rulers, I should speak against it. If it's perpetrated by my relatives, people around me, I should speak against it. Justice must prevail. Somebody recently asked me, and a Muslim recently asked me, why are Muslims so angry against Europe's and European people or Western civilization? I've already listed historic grievances, current problems that we see all around. I've listed slavery, I've listed colonialism, I've listed how our government are still supporting and funding despotic regimes in the Muslim countries, supporting dictators and despots, illegitimate regimes, rulers and monarchs, just because they're prepared to pay us, they're prepared to buy our weapons and buy and give us oil. This is a disgraceful attitude. This is called unethical foreign policy agenda that the Western governments have pursued. And for as long as there is unethical foreign policies, for as long as there is injustice in the world, for as long as there is evil in the world, remember, brothers and sisters, injustice is the root of all evil. Injustice is the root of all evil. Even extremism and terrorism all stem from injustice. There are some people, some journalists, some pundits, some experts, they get an allergic reaction as soon as you say our government's foreign policies, our government's unethical foreign policies, our government's illegal trade or unethical trade of weapons and weapons of mass destruction to illegitimate regimes, our government's support of illegitimate dictatorship in the Muslim world, in the developing world, our government's support of excessive wealth generated and kept within the West and not sharing it with other parts of the world, are all of the root of the extremism that we have seen proliferating in the world, terrorism that we see proliferating in the world. Some experts, media pundits and journalists get an allergic reaction. They can't stand it. When you speak like me, they call me an extremist because I call out the government for its failure and blunders. Brothers and sisters, we should call a spade a spade. Unethical foreign policy is evil. Selling arms to dictators and despots are evil. Supporting dictators and despots are evil. It's injustice. The more you support injustice, the more you support evil around the world, the more extremism you give credence and oxygen to, for it to rise and proliferate. If you want to end extremism in the world, deal with the root causes. The root causes is injustice. Allah says that in the Quran. Allah says that in the Quran. And as Muslims, we believe in the words of Allah. In every word that Allah says, injustice from this world must be eradicated, eliminated. Brothers and sisters, wherever you turn your eyes, wherever you see injustice, we must stand up for justice. We must stand up against the oppressors. We must stand up against aggressors. We must stand up against those people who perpetrate injustice. We must do everything possible in our capacity to ensure that the world is peaceful. And peace in this world will not come for as long as there is injustice. Injustice includes illegal occupation of other people's lands and territory. Injustices includes support of dictators and despots. Injustices include selling arms to illegitimate regimes. Injustices include denying other people their freedom. Freedom to rule, freedom to elect their own rulers, freedom to participate in election. Injustices include our unethical foreign policies. Injustices include things that we do only for our self-interest. I would like to see a complete and comprehensive change around the world. I'd like to see a reformed United Nations in which every nation has equal rights and equal say around the table. I'd like to see scrapping of the permanent Security Council members and the veto holding 5 Security Council members. I'd like to see a complete scrapping of it and every nation having the right to voice their concerns and together deciding the future. Why should a few people have such power? I'd like to see redistribution of wealth to the poor parts of the world and not all the wealth accumulated and hoarded and stored in the Western countries. I'd like to see return of some of the stolen wealth that the Western nations have stolen during colonial time in building its own countries and its own capital. I'd like to see restorative justice around the world. When I see restorative justice, I'll see, and I can guarantee you there will be peace and stability in the world. I'd like to see Palestine free. I'd like to see Jewish people, Muslims, Christians living together in Palestine, in that holy land, as Jerusalem as the capital of all people, freely as equal citizens. I'd like to see Kashmir free, and Kashmir is having the right to determine their own future. I'd like to see Yemen free without the interference of Saudi Arabia or Iran. I'd like to see Syria free without the interference of neighboring countries. I'd like to see Iraq free. I'd like to see Bangladesh free of Indian hegemony. I'd like to see Bangladesh free of corruption. I'd like to see Afghanistan free of corruption. I'd like to see Nigeria free of corruption. I'd like to see every part of the world free of occupation, free of interference, free of support to dictators and despots, free, and those people are free to choose their own destiny. I'd like to see freedom in all parts of the world. That's how we establish justice in the world. And that's what Allah says in the Quran when He says, Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adli wal ihsan. Allah orders you to be just and excellent. Allah orders you and I to be just and excellent, even if it means to go against our own self-interest. Even if it means we go against our own parents and our own relatives. Even if it means we stand against those who are rich and powerful and perpetrating injustice. Even if it means we stand up against the poor if they are perpetrating injustice. Even if it means we have to stand up against our own self and go against our own feelings. But stand for justice is closest to Allah consciousness. I'dilu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa. Be just. That is the closest you can ever be to Allah consciousness. May Allah bless us, enable us, empower us to become a people who are just to all people, who are just at all costs. And we struggle for the justice and freedom of all people in all parts of the world. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Brothers and sisters, I've spoken about global injustices and how we Muslims are duty bound to be just at all costs. You know, brothers and sisters, we live in the UK, and in the UK, I believe we live in a very happy and a comfortable environment. There are injustices, but there are ways to overcome those injustices. We have law and order in our country. We've got freedom. We've got democracy. We've got courts. We've got access to justice in this country. There is one injustice that is not being dealt with adequately as we speak right now. It's called our government's agenda against some of the Muslim communities in this country. Some of the agenda. One of those, my brothers and sisters, is called the prevent agenda. And I cannot but speak about it. I have to speak about it. Muslims are facing injustice through prevent. When I speak against prevent, some people don't want me to speak against prevent. They want me to stay silent. They get an allergic reaction if you speak against prevent. There are some people who are making a living out of prevent. They get an allergic reaction. There are government bodies, lobbies, right-wing organizations who hate Muslims speaking against prevent. And there are government ministers who also hate when Muslims express their outrage and opposition to prevent. A recent letter has been written by various organizations, 17, 18 organizations, Amnesty International, Liberty, many organizations that stand for freedom and human rights. They've all signed it, and they're called the scrapping of prevent. Prevent should be scrapped. Government has been told by people for the last 10 years, scrap prevent. Why am I saying this? My brothers and sisters, the reason why I'm saying this is because prevent is a curse for our community. It divides us. It pitches us against one another. It makes us spy on each other. It criminalizes our community, especially those who subscribe to conservative religious practices and have a variation in their cultural expressions. It destroys our confidence, our self-worth, our self-esteem. It pushes us to become the good slaves of the state. Prevent has come to be known as a woeful depiction of a racist and Islamophobic agenda pursued by our government and pushed by the far right and neoconservative anti-Muslim bigots and their agencies. Many minority communities harbour a deep level of mistrust towards the government for its failure to realise the impact of its failed policies, especially the Muslims, and they have been at the receiving end. Remember, civil liberties organisations such as human rights organisations such as Amnesty International have called for scrapping of this particular strand. But government doesn't. Government insists on doing more and more. Sadly, the deadly impact, the lethal impact has been felt by people in all sections of our community. Do you know, my brothers and sisters, Muslim communities have faced Prevent ever since the government passed the counter-terrorism bill in 2015, making controversial counter-terrorism Prevent program a statutory duty upon public sector workers. Teachers, doctors have been told to spy and keep an eye on the Muslim population of our country, so that they could be referred, they could spot the signs of radicalized young people. Often it feels and it's left with vagaries and inadequate guidelines. Such guidelines has caused Muslim community to disproportionately be targeted and simply criminalized. In 2018, human rights advocacy group Liberty criticized the government's counter-terror strategy for using dangerously vague definition of extremism to tarnish communities, as well as encouraging policing by prejudice. Did you know, brothers and sisters, in 2019, a 13-year-old child was questioned by school because the child apparently was an eco-terrorist and used the eco-terrorist as a term to describe his or her passion for our environment. And this child was accused of having jihadist group's affiliation and was investigated. A 4-year-old child was referred to Prevent program for mispronouncing the word cucumber. Another child was referred to the Prevent program for writing, instead of saying a terrorist house, misspelling it and calling it a terrorist house. Brothers and sisters, a few weeks ago, a 4-year-old child was referred to a program for playing the Fortnite, the online program. This is ridiculous. The chilling effect of this from the successive government's effort to counter extremism has shut down debate and prevented many from engaging in our democratic process. As people are constantly feeling under surveillance, controversial opinions are silenced because otherwise they will be seen as radical. Yet, we believe we should be open and challenged. The chilling effect of counter-terrorism policy has been documented by universities after universities. Students have become fearful of engaging in discussions lest they may be cast as extremists. Anyone who opens their mouth to criticize the Israeli activities against the Palestinian people often get labeled as extremists. This is awful. This is awful. And I'd like us to stop this immediately. Muslim children are affected. In the last 3 years alone, my brothers and sisters, Muslim people aged between 16 and 18 have been reported as anxious about Prevent strategy. They worry that their religious actions may be misinterpreted, misunderstood. They view that Prevent strategy as a government policy to assess how religious they are and identify whether they are extremists is wrong. Muslim people aged between 13 and 15 worry that they are being viewed as extremists, even if they did not know about Prevent strategy. They're anxious about the repercussion, so they self-censor, modify their behavior and speech in order to prevent anyone viewing them as an extremist. Muslim people find it hard to trust their teachers because of their anxieties around society's perception of Muslims and the teachers' role in implementing the Prevent strategy. Muslim peoples consider that the media plays a big part in fostering society's view that they're extremists. They do not trust the media to give an objective account of Muslim communities in society. Muslims, teachers share the anxiety of Muslim peoples about prevent strategy. They're anxious about being seen as extreme too. Muslim peoples feel vulnerable not to extremism but to Islamophobia. They feel ashamed of these experiences and do not share their experiences with their peers, their teachers, or anyone in the authority. This was a research done and found. The findings I've just read out, a research led by a University of London SARS. The impact of prevent strategy, brothers and sisters, has been colossal. It costs about £40 million a year, and there is no solid evidence that it worked, and it has never been independently evaluated. A government commission review has been repeatedly delayed. In 2015, prevent became a statutory duty for many public sector bodies, including the NHS. Do you know the mental health impact? People with mental health conditions are disproportionately referred to prevent, yet evidence for official claim that people with mental health conditions are more likely to be drawn into extremism or terrorism is not robust and may fuel the stigma. Prevent referrals can damage people's physical and mental health as well as their families by inflicting damage on therapeutic relationships, setting back recovery, interrupting care, causing patients to disengage, limiting provision by support services, and even triggering mental health problems in individuals with no prior psychiatric history. Did you know that mental health impact has been colossal? The voluntary support hub scheme, which embeds NHS mental health professional into counter-terrorism police-led project, raises acute ethical concern for both practitioners as well as those who are at the receiving end. Racial and religious impact. Within the NHS, research suggests that Muslims are reported to prevent 8 times more than non-Muslims. And Asians are referred 4 times more than the non-Asians. The evidence indicates that this disproportionality is as a result of a racial and religious discrimination stemming from the racial bias contained in the prevent training material. The disproportionate negative impact on marginalized minority population and people with mental health conditions mean prevent risks exasperating pre-existing health inequalities. It impacts confidentiality. Trust is the bedrock of patient health, professional relationship, and relies on the provision of confidentiality in medical care. Breaching this specific creates distrust. Prevent training material strongly emphasizes the importance of disclosing information while consistently providing disclaimer around or even discouraging consent seeking. Since prevent does not deal with the imminent risk of non-consensual referral, can never rely on a public interest justification. Despite breaching confidentiality, such referrals are cause of huge concern. Brothers and sisters, to make things worse, this government has now appointed a very colourful figure called William Shawcross, a former head of charity watchdog, who made a controversial comment about Islam and is now going to be doing the review on behalf of government. In 2012, William Shawcross was a director of a neoconservative think tank called the Henry Jackson Society, and while serving in that position, he wrote, Europe and Islam is one of the greatest, Europe and Islam is one of the greatest, most terrifying problem of our future. I think all European countries have a vastly, very quickly growing Islamic population. He was saying Islam is the problem for Europe, and this is the guy who is now going to lead government's review on prevent. Shawcross has made a mission of his life to vilify Muslim organizations while he was the chair of Charity Commission. He continually intervened and investigated campaigning organizations and activists of all backgrounds